Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to provide you with an update as to what's happening in the Russian economy. Immediately following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, lots of countries from the West came out and issued sanctions against Russia. And these have had a devastating impact in terms of the income that Russia is earning, predominantly from oil and natural gas sales. However, prior to Russia's invasion, there were thousands of Western companies that had set up business in Russia that were employing people and making huge profits. As soon as news of the invasion broke, many companies such as BP, Shell and ExxonMobil stated that they no longer wanted any involvement in Russia and that they were exiting with immediate effect and writing off all of their investments. And this has led to an estimated cost to the West of $100 billion in terms of all of that money that's been invested into Russia. But actually the impact on the global economy is much greater than that because of the ongoing profits. When you're talking about oil and gas developments, the heavy cost of the investment up front requires a long payback period. So many of those investments are still at a relatively early stage in terms of paying back the initial investment and generating huge amounts of cash. But in today's video, I want to talk about a recent development for some of the companies that have been trying to actively manage their exit process to organise a sale of their business to Russian companies so that they can hand over control of those factories and all of the employees. Now, during the course of 2023, President Putin has decided to move the goalposts on a number of occasions in terms of the rules and regulations surrounding a potential sale. Two major energy businesses, the German company Uniper and the Scandinavian company Fortum, both owned and operated multiple power stations in Russia. And in April of this year, President Putin issued a decree taking ownership of all of those assets, basically nationalising them and preventing both of their owners from either receiving any proceeds from a sale or receiving any income from future profits that those assets were generating. And following on from those announcements, it's recently been announced that two companies who were in the process of selling their assets to Russian owners, Danone, the French company that makes lots of dairy products, and Carlsberg, the Danish brewer, have both had their assets seized and basically nationalised as well. And from a business point of view, this represents a disappointing outcome and also a new low in terms of the deals that are being done in Russia. Earlier this year, President Putin issued another decree stating that any Western owners who were selling their assets could only do so for a maximum of 50% of the value. So basically, you had to give your business away at a maximum of half price. And even when you went through that process, you then had to pay a voluntary, in inverted commas, tax of up to 10%. So basically, the most that you could ever achieve for your sale would be 45% because you sell it for 50% and then you have to give over 10% of that 50% to the government as a tax to say thank you very much for letting me sell my business. But unfortunately for both Carlsberg and Danone, they didn't even get to that stage. They had signed contracts, agreed deals for undisclosed sums because you're not allowed to actually say how much you're selling for unless it's €1, which a lot of businesses have been sold for. But just when they thought they'd got those deals done and were taking them over the line and were about to exit from Russia, they've had their assets seized by the Russian authorities. They've basically been nationalised and they have got zero in terms of the return on those investments. So in today's episode, we'll have a detailed look at what's happened to the sale processes for Danone and Carlsberg. And I'll tell you a latest development in terms of the Carlsberg story, which I'm sure will put a smile on a few people's faces. We'll then talk about what happened to Uniper and Fortum. We'll have a look at the total amount of losses that have been incurred by various companies over the course of the last 18 months relating to their investments in Russia. And then finally today, I'll wrap up with my summary. So what I think the implications of what's going on in Russia right now relating to these businesses is for both the Russian economy and also the global economy. But before we get into all of that, I'd like to remind you that if you'd like to see more videos like this and also be able to avoid all of the adverts that you get put forward on YouTube, then please check out my Patreon channel. However, if you don't like Patreon and you'd like to support the channel, please have a look below where you'll find links to buy me a coffee, as well as YouTube's Super Thanks and membership scheme. In October 2022, Danone announced that it agreed a deal to sell its Russian dairy business to a Russian buyer for an undisclosed sum.
French food company Danone will cede control of its dairy food business in Russia, it said on Friday. The deal could lead to a write-off of up to €1 billion, or about $978 million. It joins a lengthy list of global companies making costly exits from Russia over the war in Ukraine. For Danone, a business representing about 90% of its operations in Russia will be offloaded, with its infant nutrition unit remaining. In a statement, the company said the move was the best option to ensure long-term local business continuity. A source close to the matter said Danone could retain a stake in the Russian dairy unit, which accounted for about 5% of the group's net sales in the first 9 months of the year. The company did not disclose to whom the business would be transferred.
However, it's now been announced that Russia have seized all of the assets of Danone's Russian business, which puts an end to the sale process. This action follows the signing of a decree by President Putin to transfer control of Danone's local subsidiary to Russia's Federal Agency for State Property Management. Danone said in a statement that it was investigating the issue, adding that the Kremlin's decision would have no impact on its financial guidance for 2023. Danone has subsequently said that it's reviewing its legal options after the Russian state takeover and was in contact with the French authorities, including President Emmanuel Macron's office. However, the company does not yet know what is legally feasible. In June 2023, Danish brewer Carlsberg announced that it had signed an agreement to sell its Russian business, but was unable to name the buyer or the agreed price for the transaction, which was subject to an extensive regulatory review by Moscow. At the time of the announcement, the Carlsberg chief executive stated, "The signing of an agreement to sell the Russian business is a very important milestone in the highly complex separation and selling process. While it has been an extensive process, it has been important for us to reach the best possible solution for all stakeholders." Carlsberg had 8 breweries and around 8,400 employees in Russia. In 2021, Carlsberg generated 10% of all its revenue in Russia, and in 2022 took a $1.4 billion write-down on its operations. However, it's now been announced that Russia has taken control of Carlsberg's business in Russia. And in response to this action, Carlsberg has stated that it had not received any official information from the Russian authorities regarding the presidential decree or the consequences for its breweries. Following the announcement of the seizure of the assets, Carlsberg has announced that it has ended license agreements for its brands in Russia, which is seen as a direct retaliation to the loss of its investment. Carlsberg stated that it's informed its Russian business that the license agreements enabling it to produce, market and sell all Carlsberg Group products, including international and regional brands, has been terminated. We have now concluded that we currently see no path to a negotiated solution for exiting Russia. We refuse to be forced into a deal on unacceptable terms, justifying the illegitimate takeover of our business in Russia. The seizure of the Carlsberg breweries follows on from the recent announcement that Dutch brewer HEINEKEN had completed its exit from Russia by selling its operations to Russia's Ernest Group for a symbolic €1, so basically no value. HEINEKEN, the world's second largest brewer, said the deal had received all the required approvals and was likely to leave it with exceptional losses of around $325 million. HEINEKEN had 7 breweries in Russia and 1,800 employees who will receive employment guarantees for the next 3 years. The Dutch brewer removed its HEINEKEN brand from Russia in 2022, and production of Amstel is to be phased out within the next 6 months. Chief Executive Dolf van den Brink said, "Recent developments demonstrate the significant challenges faced by large manufacturing companies in exiting Russia." However, he would not go into details as to why the search for a buyer took longer than expected, calling the process highly complex. "We are happy this process comes to an end and to be able to leave Russia," he added. HEINEKEN said the deal, with no option to buy the business back, includes a 3-year license for some smaller regional brands, for which HEINEKEN would not provide brand support or receive any proceeds. The Russian business that has bought the business, Ernest Group, owns a major can packaging plant and is the largest Russian manufacturer of aerosols, as well as selling cosmetics and household goods. HEINEKEN has said the transaction will have a negligible impact on its full-year outlook. On Tuesday the 25th of April, President Putin of Russia signed a decree establishing control of the Russian assets of 2 foreign energy firms. The decree, outlining possible retaliation if Russian assets abroad are seized, showed Moscow has already taken action against the German business Uniper's Russian assets and the assets of the Finnish energy business Fortum. The decree said Russia needed to take urgent measures to respond to unspecified actions from the United States and others it said were unfriendly and contrary to international law. The Uniper business in Russia operates 5 power plants. The largest of these, which is located in the centre of Russia, is a gas power plant that has an installed capacity of 5.6 gigawatts. The second largest of these is a coal-fired power station that has an installed capacity of 2.4 gigawatts. The third largest is in Moscow and has an installed capacity of 1.5 gigawatts. The fourth largest is a combined gas and coal power station that has an installed capacity of 1 gigawatt. And the fifth largest is another gas and coal combined facility that has an installed capacity of 630 megawatts. The total installed capacity equates to around 5% of Russia's total energy requirements, and the company employs 4,500 people in Russia. Fortum owns 7 thermal power plants in Russia. 6 plants produce electricity and heat for the market, while 1 produces only electricity. In addition to the power plants that Fortum operates, it also has a joint venture in Russia with a portfolio of 3.4 gigawatts of wind and solar plants. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Fortum announced that it had stopped all new investment projects in Russia and would not be providing any new financing to its Russian subsidiaries. In May 2022, the company announced that it was preparing a controlled exit from the Russian market, with potential divestments of the Russian operation as the preferred path. They also made a decision to replace all Russian fuels with other fuels in all of its other business interests. As I mentioned at the start of the video, a lot of businesses at the start of the Ukraine conflict announced that they were walking away from their investments in Russia, and some of these investments were huge. So let's have a look at which companies incurred the biggest losses as part of writing off all of that investment. BP is the company that has incurred the single biggest loss as part of their full exit out of Russia and declared a write-down of $24 billion relating to its stakes in Rosneft and 2 other joint ventures in Russia. The company that's incurred the second biggest loss in the world is the French business Total Energies, and has recorded impairment costs of $10.7 billion. Shell, which is the world's largest trader of liquefied natural gas and had been involved in a joint venture facility on the island of Sakhalin with Russia, have written off $5 billion of investment as a result of their decision to fully exit from Russia. ExxonMobil, the giant US oil business, was one of the first to develop a joint venture in Russia and has disclosed a $3.4 billion write-down relating to its full exit from the country. OMV, the Austrian energy business, has taken a €2 billion hit on its decision to exit. The Norwegian business Equinor has shut all its facilities, incurring a loss of $1.1 billion, and Enel, the Italian utility business, sold its 56% stake in Enel Russia for around €137 million, incurring a loss of €1.3 billion. The French bank Société Générale had the largest exposure as a result of its ownership of Russian bank Rosbank. Directly following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, SocGen started the process of selling this stake, and it was sold to a Russian oligarch, and SocGen incurred a loss of €3.2 billion on the deal. Italian bank Unicredit had the second largest exposure to the Russian market, and so far has booked a €1.3 billion loss relating to all of the loans that it currently has out to Russian companies and individuals. French bank Crédit Agricole had the third largest exposure and has taken a hit of €500 million. Austrian bank Raiffeisen International had a variety of branches and so far has taken a hit of €301 million. Italian insurer Generali also had large exposure and so far has taken a hit of €138 million. American bank Citigroup had developed a commercial and consumer banking business in Russia over the course of the last 20 years and so far has incurred charges of $170 million relating to that exposure. And Swiss banking giant UBS has so far written off $100 million and so far has reduced its loan exposure from $600 million to $400 million. Over the last 20 years or so, McDonald's have built an extensive network of stores in Russia. However, McDonald's has taken the decision to exit entirely from Russia and has sold all of its stores to a Russian business who has had to rebrand it and is not allowed to use the McDonald's name. And as part of that deal, McDonald's have incurred a loss of $1.4 billion. AB InBev, the large Belgian brewer, had a non-controlling stake in a Russian joint venture and has written off $1.1 billion as part of its exit. US tobacco giant Philip Morris has discontinued sales of a number of Marlboro and Parliament cigarette products in Russia and has taken a hit of over $1 billion. HEINEKEN, the makers of a number of consumer products, including Persil washing detergent and Prick glue, has also incurred a write-off of €1 billion as part of its exit from the country. French car maker Renault had set up its own facilities in Russia and also had a majority stake in Russia's biggest car maker, AutoVAZ. As a result of the invasion of Ukraine, Renault has now exited from the country and sold its stake in AutoVAZ for €1 ruble, incurring a loss of €867 million in the year. Nissan, the Japanese car company, had also set up facilities in Russia. However, they have now sold this for €1 to a Russian state-owned entity, incurring a loss of $687 million. Volkswagen, the German car business, had set up a truck division under its Traton brand and have now disposed of this, incurring a loss of €550 million. Volvo, the Swedish car manufacturer, has suspended all of its activities and set aside provisions of $423 million. And finally, the US car manufacturer Ford, which actually has two large manufacturing facilities in Russia and quite a large business, hasn't actually decided to exit from Russia yet. It's only suspended its operations as it stands currently. And so far, they have only taken a $122 million write-down, which is obviously considerably less than the other car manufacturers. However, if they do decide to exit, then this sum is likely to increase considerably. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video really to bring you up to speed as to what's happening, particularly with regards to the companies that were previously trading in Russia, and look at what happened to those assets. And as we've seen in today's video, Russia is now taking a more aggressive stance to all of the companies that are still left in Russia. And we saw that Danone and Carlsberg have basically had their assets taken away from them at the point when they had a sale agreed. So they were going to get back some return on the investment that they'd put into the country over the course of the last 10 to 15 years. However, Russia suddenly decided that it didn't like that idea and that it was just going to take away the assets and keep them for themselves. And these developments obviously follow on from the seizure of the power plants and other energy products that were previously owned by Uniper and Fortum. Now, if we start off by talking about those energy assets, there is a certain logic from Russia's point of view to making sure that those assets are kept operational and that they're performing to optimum capacity. So theoretically, you can understand that there may have been some concerns in Russia about the continuity of those energy supplies. And so there is a certain logic to say, well, they may want to nationalise those assets. It obviously would have been better if Russia had put forward a deal for Uniper and Fortum to actually buy those assets from them, to say, okay, we're not happy with these assets being under foreign control and ownership, so we therefore want to do a deal to take them back under Russian control. But obviously they didn't bother doing that. They just decided to take them for zero value and keep them for themselves. So that's obviously turned out to be a really negative situation from both of those companies' point of view, because as I mentioned at the start of the video, when you're talking about energy assets, generally speaking, there's a heavy upfront capital cost, and it takes a long period of time to be able to pay that back through the generation of profits. So you may be looking at 20 to 30 year payback for some of these assets. So to have the assets seized and taken away from you obviously just represents a complete write-off. But if we now look at what's happened to Danone and Carlsberg, both of those companies had signed agreements with Russian businesses to sell their operations. So the deal was done, it was all ready to go, it just needed to be approved by the Russian authorities. And President Putin has already changed the rules in terms of what the value of those companies might have been. It was a maximum of 50% of the value, so you're definitely going to get a very good deal if you're the Russian buyer, because the most you can pay is half price. And also the Russian government does quite well because they're going to take a 10% clip on any deal that's done. So everything was all ready, the deal was oven baked. But Russia decided that actually it didn't want to pay anything for those assets, and it was just going to take them away from both of those owners. And this, I think, is a really disappointing development, because these assets are not critical to the future energy supplies of Russia. They are consumer products. These are discretionary purchases in most instances. So people don't have to buy them. It's giving the people of Russia the choice to be able to buy Carlsberg or Danone branded yogurts. And I think this is one of the interesting points about what's happening here. I'll go on to talk about the financial implications in a minute, but one of the disappointing things I think from the Russian population's point of view is that the invasion of Ukraine is now severely limiting their choices because they can no longer access a lot of international brands. And over the course of the last 30 years, we have seen a huge move forward in terms of the internationalization of all countries. You can now buy anything you like. If you go down to your local supermarket or store, there is a huge choice of things available from all over the world. And if you think back to the 1970s and 80s, you just didn't have that choice. There was a very limited supply of things on sale. And that's basically where Russia is heading. It's going back to losing access to all of those international brands, all the different things from around the world. They'll no longer be available. It's back to basics for the Russian people. And I think that's quite a sad thing overall when you think about the normal people of Russia who are not involved in this war and not making decisions about whether to send any more tanks to Ukraine. They just want to go down to the shops, buy things and come home and have a happy life. But unfortunately for those people, their choices are being limited severely by what's happening in Ukraine. But if we come on to the financial implications, as we've talked about today, the estimated cost of all of the investment into Russia historically by the Western companies who've already exited is over $100 billion. So that has been completely written off. That has gone in terms of the global economy. But the impact on the global economy is actually much, much greater than that. Because the reason that those companies had invested into Russia was to establish operations for long-term profitability. They were setting up companies and factories and operations so that they could make profit for the next 50 to 100 years. And clearly for most of these Western companies, that profit has now disappeared. So you need to add that value on top of the 100 billion to get the real impact on the global economy. So there is definitely a negative impact on the West. However, the negative impact on Russia is far greater. Firstly, they've lost a lot of the products that these companies were making in Russia. And many of these products were higher margin, higher value products, so therefore would have been generating more tax for the Russian economy. But also those companies were employing hundreds of thousands of people. Now, in many situations, the assets have been nationalized or taken over by Russians, but they've lost the license to the brands for a lot of those businesses. So that will have an impact in terms of the ultimate sale price for those products. They may not be as high margin or highly priced as they were historically. But one of the most important factors is the expertise that has been lost from the Russian market. The reason that these companies went into Russia in the 90s and the noughties was because it represented an underdeveloped market. They needed companies to come in with expertise to be able to make things, market things, and do things better than Russia had been doing historically. But all of that has now been written off. And one of the key areas that we've talked about before is oil and gas, because the oil majors such as BP, Shell, ExxonMobil, they had that global expertise, how to get oil out of the ground in the most efficient way and how to use technology to make sure that there weren't any future breakdowns. And the problem that Russia has now is that they've lost that expertise and they've also lost access to the technology. And if they start to encounter problems in drilling and releasing the oil and natural gas, they may not be able to fix them. And that could ultimately lead to catastrophic failure of their oil and gas drilling facilities. So the overall summary of today's video is that the financial cost of the exit from Russia of Western companies is more than 100 billion, significantly more than $100 billion, which will have a negative impact on the global economy, but it will have a far more serious impact on the Russian economy. There is a short-term gain to nationalising assets. You pick up all of those factories and facilities for no cost, and you can carry on employing the people. But if you lose the access to the brands, you lose access to expertise, and you lose access to technology, then those assets are likely to diminish in value and productivity, and in the long term, Russia will suffer from being isolated. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's episode, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.